Hey everyone, Cole here with trainwithcole.com, and I wanted to make a quick video about the topic of should we count trace macronutrients in foods that are not primarily made up of that macro. And what I mean is, should we count, for example, if we're choosing to eat a sweet potato as a carbohydrate source, should we track the trace fats and protein in those foods? Because a lot of times I feel like people, when they are trying to lose weight, diet, they will talk about eating certain foods, healthy foods, or clean foods, or low calorie foods, or trying to eat certain types of macronutrients exclusively, but they don't realize that most foods have contain all three kinds of macronutrients, even if the food in question is primarily made up all of one. Sweet potato, for example, primarily is just carbohydrates, but there are a little trace amounts of fat and protein in them. Another thing that a lot of people will talk about when dieting is, say, things like vegetables and things like fiber content don't need to be traced or tracked. That you can't gain any weight because majority of vegetables are fiber, and fiber isn't totally absorbed by the body. So therefore, how are you going to gain weight? I'm here to talk about today that in both of those scenarios, I agree that you absolutely should, or I believe rather that you absolutely should count trace macronutrients in foods, and that you should not count any food as freebies. So let's talk about counting trace macronutrients first. If you're following a dieting caloric value plan, you're tracking macronutrients. The trace macros in different foods are going to add up. A common food like oatmeal, for example, that a lot of people eat, it has a decent amount of protein and fat in it. Not a lot. It's definitely primarily carbohydrates. But half a cup of oats has 2.5 grams of fat. Well, if you have 1 to 2 cups a day, that's another 5 to 10 grams of fat that, if you don't count for them, that's a extra bunch of calories that you might not account for, and those little things add up over time and could definitely impede progress if you're not tracking them. So I definitely believe you need to, whatever calories are in certain foods, and whatever macronutrients are in certain foods, they need to be tracked, they need to be counted. They do matter, they do add up, and just because they're tiny and small, they're still significant. So don't let yourself fall into the trap of thinking that, oatmeal is just carbohydrates, or 90-10 ground beef is just protein. No, there's still 10% fat in there, and that can add up really quickly if you're not tracking that and being careful. In terms of foods that are freebies, some people will say eat as many vegetables as you like. You've never seen somebody get fat on vegetables. Okay, that's true. I don't know of anybody who just gorge themselves on salad or mixed greens, unless they were drenching it in ranch or something, gained a bunch of weight. The thing is, though, however, if you just consume large quantities of vegetables, you could consume 1, 2, 3, 400 calories extra in a day if you're eating just massive amounts of those things. And over time, yes, the majority of it's fiber, and it might not be totally broken down, but there's still caloric value to that fiber. And that those foods could still potentially be stored as body fat. While it's pretty rare, it could happen. But more or less what's going to happen is it's going to add to your total energy intake for the day. And over time, if you do this day in, day out over the weeks and months, that might hinder fat loss. It might not stop it, but you might not be making as optimal progress as you possibly could. Another, though, something specific with vegetables is why you should not classify all vegetables as freebies at all, is some vegetables have much higher caloric value than others. Corn being one of them. A cup of corn is calorically a lot higher than, say, a cup of bell pepper or mushroom or cucumber or something like that. If it has a caloric value, it needs to count. Even if it's something ridiculous that has hardly any calories, like mushrooms, for example, you should still count it. I think maybe the only times I wouldn't count certain foods is if I'm making like some omelet, and I put some diced white onion and some diced bell pepper in it. just I'm talking about just a little sprinkling of both. If I'm putting a cup of each, well, that's a lot, but you would still want to count it because there are absolutely calories in it. Not a lot, but there still are. So that's the point I want to drive home. If it has caloric value, if you stick it in your mouth to eat it, it should be tracked if you want the most optimal weight loss during a diet plan or phase that you're in.